there are many things that they never tell you in school. For example, you probably learned about, and maybe even you read some poetry by Percy Bysshe Shelley, but I'll bet you never heard this episode from his private life. I know that Ed has, but because he's a school teacher and he knows everything. But maybe you've never heard this. Okay, the year was 1817, and it was a difficult year for Shelley. He was despondent, pacing the streets of Oxford, racking his brain, but he found no relief. Well, anyway, one morning while he was out walking, he encountered a fellow poet, John Keats, and Shelley told him of his plight, that he was suffering from what's known as writer's block. No matter how hard he tried and no matter what he did, he just couldn't get going. Have you ever had writer's block?
Often.
Well, that very thing happened to me last year, said Keats, but I found relief at a small religious retreat off the coast of Cornwall. It's run by an order of nuns, and there's nothing to do but listen to the surf and seagulls. In that serene setting, I found peace and a renewed zest for writing. And that's what I will do, vowed Shelley, and he hurried off to make arrangements. 3 days later, after a long, dusty, and tiring coach ride, he arrived at a small coastal village where he hired a skiff to take him over to the island retreat. It was 3 miles distant. As the boatman methodically pulled the oars, a slight breeze sprang up. Soon it was an angry wind, and the waves were getting higher and higher. The boatman pulled as hard as he could to get to the island as quickly as possible so that he might return to the mainland before conditions got to be really dangerous. As the boat pulled up to the island's one small dock, Shelley jumped ashore and scrambled up the stone steps leading to the convent. He pounded on the big oaken door, and soon a small window opened and a young woman peered out. I'm Percy Bysshe Shelley, and I've come here to retreat. Well, I'm sorry, said the young woman. I'm only a novitiate, and I have no authority to let you in. Well then, said Shelley, who does? I'm afraid that only Mother Superior can do that. Unless I have her signature on an admittance slip, I cannot let you in. So get her to sign the admittance form, directed Shelley. Oh, I can't do that. She has retired for the night and cannot be disturbed. But my boat has left and the storm is intensifying. Surely you could break the rules just this once and let me in. Absolutely not, said the young woman. You'll just have to wait till the nun signs Shelley.
Couldn't have hoped.
A long way. Well, that's in Ed Romond's honor. Ed is, as you know, our poet. He doesn't need an introduction. He's not really getting one. But Ed, we're glad to have you back. And yes, I have some descriptions of your new book, and you decide when you want to hand them out, now or later?
Maybe later.
Later, okay.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Narrative poetry. Poetry that tells a story. And I suggested that theme to Herb because my new book, which is coming out next month, is called Man at the Railing, and it's been a true blessing from God, but it won this award that from the Laura Boss Poetry Foundation that and part of the award, it was 2 parts to the award. I'll tell you, one part was a cash award of $5,000.
Nice.
And the other part of the award was that it would be published by a major New York publisher, NYQ Books. And when I got the call on a Sunday afternoon the next morning when I woke up, I asked my wife if I had dreamt that. Because I was so astounded. It was a national competition, and there's an old Negro spiritual hymn called "God Has Smiled on Me," and I really think that God has smiled on me with this award. So the book will be coming out. I think officially it's coming out April 3rd, and it will be available, not that this is a commercial, but it's available on Amazon. And I just am so grateful. And so all the poems in the book will be narrative poems, poems that tell a story. And I was thinking about that we all love good stories, right? And we all, I've never met anybody who doesn't enjoy a good story. And for me, my first interest in story art was actually songs. When I was growing up, I'm 74, so I was growing up in the 50s, and I wonder how many of you remember story songs that I loved very much. El Paso, down in El Paso, there's that one. Big Bad John.
Of course,
Big Bear.
The Beatles song Eleanor Rigby, Story of a Woman.
Okay.
A very funny song by Johnny Cash, A Boy Named Sue. And of course, the Kingston Trio song, Tom Dooley, Hang Down Your Head, Tom Dooley. And I think one of the great story songs of all time is Mr. Bojangles, about when the author was in the prison cell with Mr. Bojangles. And my first interest in poetry came when I read a poem called The Highwayman, about this highwayman and coming to rescue his girlfriend. And then my interest in learning how to play the guitar was Peter, Paul, and Mary songs, folk ballads such as Barbara Allen, Lord Randall, Polly Vaughan. I always enjoyed songs that told stories, and when I got interested in poetry, my big attraction was poems that tell stories. And there's all kinds of poetry, of course. There's poetry of description, there's poetry of reflection, and I've written some of those, but my main interest has been writing poems that tell stories, and I base my stories upon my own family life, my 34 years of teaching English in public schools, my love of things like baseball, and so I thought I would start out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read some poems, and if along the way you would like to raise a question or make a comment, please feel free to raise your hand, but I will have a point towards the end where it'll be an official time if you'd like to wait till then. This is a poem that's actually in two parts, and it concerns the issue of safety. And I was thinking about safety and about, especially at night, how we consider things regarding safety to be so poignant. And I was thinking also about when Robert Kennedy was shot at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles. You might recall that they brought him through the kitchen, and Sirhan was waiting for him. And there's a photograph of Robert Kennedy on the floor, and his eyes are wide open. And the last words he said of his life, were, "Is everybody safe?"
Wow, I didn't know that.
And because at that point they didn't know whether there were 5 shooters, they didn't know anything. And it was, if you've ever seen the film footage, it's all these arms and shoulders and great chaos going on during that time. Is everybody safe? And so I was going to play the Gunsmoke theme because that's part of this poem. So this is called Night Sounds. For all of you who have children who drive, who when they first started driving, You might have gone through what I and my wife went through when our son started driving and he was out by himself at night. And so that's what this poem is. It's a story poem, but in two parts. So this is called Night Sounds. I could almost touch the tumbleweeds when I'd hear the gun smoke theme, climb the stairs to my bedroom where I'd picture big Matt Dillon, spurs jingling, guarding Dodge City with his 6 guns. I loved the safety I'd feel beneath the covers, and though gunshots might ring out, Gunsmoke would always end the same, with Marshall Dillon winning and Dodge City safe till next Saturday night at 10 o'clock. I knew my mom and dad were downstairs, and I'd feel the deeper safety of knowing they were home, so I was okay in the dark. Falling asleep was as easy as Matt Dillon arresting an outlaw on our black and white TV.
I remember that.
60 years have come and gone along with our house on Albert Street, and now I lie beside my wife, unable to sleep until I hear the purring arrival of our son's car in the driveway, then the garage door climbing the summer darkness, our front door unlocking, and the song of his teenage feet up our stairs, telling me he's okay. After hours on the trails of highways, our son has made it home. Now it's safe for me to dream.
Very beautiful.
This next story poem is a poem that I was not at because it's about when my mom and dad met each other for the first time. I was not around then.
I guess not.
I'll just say that I grew up in Woodbridge, New Jersey, and my mom was from Rahway, New Jersey, which is 4 miles away from Woodbridge. And evidently they had dances in the 1920s. They had dances in Rahway, and then they'd have dances in Woodbridge. And my dad was quite a dancer, and so anyway, I think the rest of this poem is self-explanatory. But I'll just say there's a song that I wasn't planning to play anyway, so it doesn't matter if it's partly this part. But it's a song that was the #1 song in the 1925 when my mom and dad met, and the song was called Always. I'll be loving you always.
Oh, yes.
And I've always liked that song, and so that's referenced in this poem here. And one other thing, and that is that there's a reference to my dad being an honorable truck driver. And he was an enormously honest person. And when he died, I heard that over and over and over again from his friends and fellow truck drivers coming into the funeral home, how honest he was. So, this is called The Night My Father Met My Mother. They tell me he'd be the last man on the floor, dancing till the lights went on. The Charleston, the Lindy, his wavy hair bouncing, his joyous eyes bright, a good man moving in grace across the dance floor. Through the lens of memory, I watch my dad, honorable truck driver, extraordinary dancer, one night in 1920s Rahway, New Jersey, walk over to ask a pretty woman to dance. And she says yes, and he tells her his name is Ed, and she tells him her name is Margaret. and they waltz to the sweetness of always. The music leading them in darkness, dancing and dancing, my young father's arms, a muscular tenderness around her. Maybe he knows even then he will never let her go. And this is another poem that concerns my dad, but I was thinking, my wife and I talked recently this week. We had heard of a particularly upsetting bullying incident that occurred in a school. And you might be aware that bullying has become a big problem in some of the schools and even in middle school. And the idea of kids literally persecuting other kids. And my wife and I have often said, where does that come from? How could they not feel for another person who's being bullied? And I think it gets down to the whole issue of empathy. Sympathy is when you feel for someone. Empathy is when you feel with someone. And when I think back to my father, I think about how empathetic he was, the way he would talk about different things, the way he would talk about different situations. And so this poem takes place in 1958. And it was during a time that was called the Eisenhower Recession. It was a low economic time in America. And just to set this poem up, I just wanted to tell you a couple of things. Food stamps did not come in until 1961, 3 years later. Meals on Wheels did not come in until 1974. And unemployment benefits in 1958 were very minimal. And we just kind of have that in the back of your mind for this poem. And I'll also say that my dad was a self-employed truck driver, and we ran the business out of our house, and we rented a garage, a small garage at the end of our street, and that's where my dad would have his truck and be loading the truck and so forth. And so this is called New Shoes and Groceries. Recession was not a word I knew at age 9. I heard of unemployment, saw Mr. Salmi down the street just sit on his front porch all day. His son, Buddy, borrowed money, lunch money from me twice, but recession was still vast and abstract until the Sunday I helped my dad load his truck and a man walked in holding his daughter by his hand and his son in his arms. "Excuse me, sir," he said to my father. "Are you hiring? I know how to drive a truck." "No," my father said, "it's just me here." The man looked down at the floor and said, "I sure could use the work, sir. I've been laid off at GM." "I'm sorry," my dad said quietly. "It's just me." The man turned to leave, then pointed around the garage. "I could clean up for you, sir. Sweep the floor, wash your truck. I sure could use the work, sir." My father answered softly, "No, my sons do that for me. I'm sorry." I watched the man walk out, holding on to his children, and saw my dad's eyes darken with the pain of a brother-father. Recession, unemployment, just words for me. But my dad could see the man's children's new shoes and family groceries. and the paycheck that would not be there to buy them.
It's really powerful.
Also wanted to add one more thing. Poems are not meant to be newspaper articles, meaning that sometimes a poet may fool around with the details a little bit to make a better poem. There's an expression called, you need to lie your way to the truth, meaning that sometimes it just may be that you want to change things because you're doing that for the sake of the total poem. I will add that sometimes this can cause some, I don't want to say problems, but in a family, if you're writing a poem about, say, something that happened in the family, the other family members will say, wait a minute, that's not the way. And for example, I wrote a poem about my brothers and I going out walking in the wintertime with our dog. And in the poem, I have my dog as, quote, a collie. And one of my brothers when he read the poem, he said, Ginger was not a collie, she was half collie, half German Shepherd. And I said, well, I know that, but that would make the line that much harder.
Poetic license.
So there are times when you just need to play around with the facts a little bit. And then about this poem, we were joking earlier about the chasm between generations, and but I'm sure you all know that the Everly brothers, and the Everly brothers were Don Everly and Phil Everly, and they have both passed on now. But I was in, for 7 years I studied to be a Catholic priest, and I was in what used to be called a minor seminary, which was high school seminary. So I left home after 8th grade to go live at this seminary, and it was a residential school, and we lived there the whole time, and we were able to come home for vacations for like Thanksgiving and Christmas, and but anyway, I met a young boy who became my lifetime best friend, and we both learned how to play guitar at the same time at the seminary, and we would often play on Saturday nights. Saturday nights we could actually stay up until 10 o'clock, so it was exciting, and this is about something that would happen on those Saturday nights. There's a reference to a song, real old song from 1965, 1964, by the British group Jerry and the Pacemakers, and it was a song called Ferry Cross the Mersey. And in the song, it's a riff back and forth of C major chord, G minor chord, C major chord, G minor chord. And that's what there's a reference to in this. So, and then after this, if any of you have any questions or comments or anything, we could chat a little bit. So this is called C major, G minor, and it's for my best friend John Garasio, who at the time was living in London. He's an actor, living in London when I wrote this poem. C major, G minor. It was our unspoken rule in high school seminary to end each Saturday night session with Ferry Cross the Mersey, with the chapel bell just minutes from summoning us to night prayers. We'd strum C major, G minor chords, their twin cadence steady as ripples on a British river. One of us would sing, "Life goes on day after day." The other would add, "Hearts torn in every way." Then we'd blend our teenage voices like the Everly brothers and sing together, "So ferry cross the Mersey and always take me there." This Saturday night, an ocean away, I take out my guitar and play the haunting repetition of C major and G minor chords and sing again about life going on day after day. My now solo voice missing the harmony with yours, missing like Don misses Phil, the music only brothers can make. So I thought this might be a time where we could, if any of you had any questions or comments about anything, you'd like to ask or say? Or... Yeah.
One person you left out as far as when you were saying about narrative songs, Harry Chapin, I think every one of his songs was that.
You know, I was actually thinking of him this morning, the Cats in the Cradle.
Yeah, all those, every one of his.
And,
I have like 4
and
CDs.
my favorite song of his, which people don't know, is called Mail Order Annie.
Yeah.
That I really loved. So, yeah. There's a lot of great story singers. So.
A lot of it didn't make the airways because they were too long.
Right. Any other questions or comments or? Yes, Jim.
I was struck by the thought that there is a chasm between generations. That is really a focus on my part. How do you bridge that chasm? And you're doing it through poetry and music.
Yeah, that's I think tougher now than it was. You know, I was thinking about. You probably remember the old Ed Sullivan show where Ed Sullivan would have acts for different age groups, and he would be singing for the kids. You know, they would have this, and so in order to hear like the Everly Brothers on the Ed Sullivan, I had to sit through, Kate Smith singing, or older. So I had a chance to actually hear other people that I might not have on my own been exposed to, and I think that's probably harder now. Music and things that maybe we used to have as a collective, as a nation, it's kind of separated now. I don't know the answer to that, but sometimes, for example, in a movie may feature a song that was actually done decades ago, and you have a whole generation of people now hearing that song for the first time and say, hey, I like that, that's a nice song. As it's turned out, my wife and I have gone to a number of wedding receptions in the last year or so, and we will sometimes hear a song that we don't know who this group is, but we'll go up and ask the DJ, and so we get a chance to hear something that we ordinarily might not have been exposed to. So it can happen like that, So
what I'm struck by is that there are chasms between the generations, as there are chasms between other peoples, and once the chasm is bridged, a new chasm comes into play.
It can.
How do you solve that?
Yeah, if I had the answer.
Well, how do you address that? You don't have to solve anything.
Yeah.
Address it.
Yeah. Well, that might actually be an interesting topic to write a poem about. So. I may put that on my.
Why do you think I said it?
I may put that on my list. But thank you, Jim, for that. Yes. Hi.
How long does it take to get a poem together? I mean, are those different thoughts running through your head?
Oh, it really varies, Judy. Some poems come very quickly. Other poems just take forever to get done. I think the longer you write, the more you become what is called a self-editor, so that you know where you are with it. You know that it's still maybe many drafts away, or you may say to yourself, I think this is it. I think this is done now. So it really does vary. I will say this, that a lot of poems will surprise the poet, him or herself. They'll say, whoa, where did that, as you're working on a poem, something may occur to you that you didn't know when you first started out writing the poem. And so the act of the act of actually writing is a way of an act of discovery for yourself as well. But as I get older and, you know, farther along in the craft, I find myself really enjoying the process of writing. When I was younger, I started writing poetry in my mid-30s. I would be very impatient. I would want to get it done. I want to get it finished and send it out and see if I had any luck with it getting published. But now I really like the process itself of writing. I enjoy that. In fact, I was actually up early this morning, and I'm working on a new poem before I drove over here today, and I was really enjoying that 45 minutes or so, just kind of fooling around with words and seeing what I could come up with. So it's a poem about Easter. You'll probably get a copy in the mail in a couple of weeks. So yes, sir.
I might have missed it, but what initially brought you into poetry, or who were your poets that sort of got you?
Well, I had an interest in writing, and as I was saying how my first writing was writing to the New York Yankees. I would write them letters, and I would enclose a self-addressed stamped envelope so they would write back, and many of them did. Many of them enclosed photos, and I remember writing a letter to Roger Maris, and I had about 38 questions that I asked him. And he sent back a small photo and it just said, "Good luck." He wasn't going to answer all those questions.
That was funny.
But I think what I enjoyed about writing the New York Yankees was getting that response back. And then in high school I was editor of the school paper, and I used to love it when people would respond to articles that were in the paper, and even if they objected or disagreed with an article, it was nice to get that response. And I got interested. I always liked reading poetry, but I got interested in writing poetry as I said, in my mid-30s. And at first I just began to toy with it a little bit, but the more I got into it, the more interested I became, and I started going to writers' conferences, and that got me even more interested. So I think it was one of those things where just a little bit of perhaps success urged me on to try a little bit more, and so I'm grateful how things turned out. So. But thank you for that question. Any other questions, or yeah?
Do you write anything other than poetry?
I try to write some songs. So I haven't done much songwriting lately, but I did write songs, and then I wrote 2 plays that were produced in New Jersey. And both of those plays were about 40 years ago. So I haven't done much with playwriting lately, but it's been mainly poetry. And but you never know. Maybe I do have an idea for a play. Don't know if anything's going to come of it, but I may work on that at some point in the next year or so. Any other questions that you'd like to ask or comments? Or
The one I remember best, and I don't remember much of it, was a poem you wrote about throwing ball when it was getting dark and your dad still had the truck to load.
Yeah, that's called Something I Could Tell You About Love. Yeah, about my dad and I playing catch, and my dad not being a baseball fan. He was not a sports fan. He looked like he was a big, burly truck driver. He looked like he could have been a football player, but he's just not interested in sports.
What's that?
And I've had some good luck with that poem. It's been in a couple of anthologies, and that was a poem that I think I had an idea about when I started writing it, but I didn't know where it was going to lead me, and that was a poem that I enjoyed working with a lot. And so thank you for remembering that poem. Any other questions or anything? Okay.
I had a couple of comments. One is directed to Jim. about the age chasm business. Wait till you get to be my age. That's the way to deal with that. The other, Ed, you mentioned about, you didn't say it this way, but this is the way I heard it, bending the truth, or bending the
Yeah.
truth to get to the truth. Is that, or could that be called poetic license?
Oh, sure,
That's what I
oh,
said.
sure.
You just-
And do you have a poetic license?
It expires in about a month, so.
How much does it
Well,
cost?
but I was thinking of, as an example, a very famous poem that Robert Frost wrote, Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. And I remember one time taking that with my high school classes, and I taught high school English for 32 years. And one of my students asked me if I knew where that specific road was where Robert Frost stopped with his horse and looked into the woods. My horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near. And I said, well, I didn't know where that road was. And then we got talking about why it wasn't really important for that to even have ever happened. It was just that the poem itself was so beautiful and so well constructed that you don't really care whether or not this is actually rooted in reality or not. This is a poem. It's not CNN. It's not New York Times. It's a poem where you're trying to get more of a feeling across. So I was also thinking about one of my favorite songs by Johnny Cash is a song called Folsom Prison
Oh,
Blues.
yeah, that's good.
And Johnny Cash was never in Folsom Prison as a prisoner. I mean, he performed there,
Yeah.
but it doesn't make any difference because the song is just so incredibly powerful that you don't care whether there's facts underneath it or not, because you're talking about a work of art. If we think of the Mona Lisa, is it really important that there was a woman who looked like that, or the fact that Da Vinci was able to do this gorgeous painting where the eyes follow you around the room? Anyway, well, I'm gonna, yes, Jim.
I think the background actually is very important. For example, there's articles in the last week or two about the Mona Lisa. And it talks about the fact that Da Vinci's mom was possibly a slave. And she had lived up in Russia in the I think it's called the Belgrade area. But he internalized that and he wrestled with that. And that ugly slave was part of much of his painting. He loved to paint very grotesque figures, and in my own view, he was really wrestling with this reality that he couldn't reconcile his past, and one of the great artists of all time, and yet it became part of one of the greatest paintings of all time. So I think that all that we write in poetry and all that we do in painting and all that we do in our storytelling is actually based on real stuff that's not worked through yet. And that's what makes us powerful and creative. We're kind of hunting for something.
Right.
And so it's not abstract, is what I'm saying.
Well, I was thinking, I agree with that, and I think what I was trying to get across, it doesn't have to be always literally true. You know, like our dog
That's
being
because
kept
we can't
Shepherd collie.
That's because we can't face it.
Right.
Well, that's another example.
Sure.
But that's because we can't face it.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
With that light of, manipulating the truth, do you think there's hope for Washington? Because
wouldn't hold my
they stopped
breath.
at the first part, and I don't see them getting to the second part,
No,
to get to the truth.
that's a whole nother Sunday morning.
But that's helpful, I think. If we consider them to be poets, then what they say does not have to be rooted in reality.
Well, I'm going to, I'm looking at the clock. Yes.
Do you ever get involved with rhyming words?
Yes, well, when I write songs, the lyrics rhyme.
Well, yeah, but I mean,
And,
poetry.
And I have, well, I won't go into, because I don't want to hold you over, but there was one baseball poetry contest that was run by the Reading Phillies. I think they're now called the Fighting Phillies. And the prize was something that I have always dreamed of doing, and the prize was that you go out onto the field and read the poem to the stands.
Oh, wow.
And so I submitted poems, I think 3 or 4 years in a row, and I always came in second. And one of the people on the judging committee said, "Tell him that we like poems that rhyme." So I thought, okay, so then I wrote this rhyming poem. I don't have it with me. I wrote a rhyming poem and I sent that in. And then after I sent it in, they announced that they were not going to have that. So, it was not meant to be. It was not meant to be. Okay, so here's my last poem before my very last poem. And this is all, not that it makes any difference in terms of the quality of the writing or anything, but this was all actually true. Everything that happens in this poem. And I'll just say that I considered teaching to be very, very important. Not that I was very important, but I really thought that working with young people, working with the next generation was very important. And I took it very seriously. And something happened, which unfortunately, I think it's unfortunate that it needs to be now, but unfortunately now is a pretty regular thing in public schools. Something happened in my 28th year of teaching that came as a complete surprise to all the teachers. Nobody knew. This was an incredibly well-kept secret of what was going to happen that morning. Nobody knew that that was happening. And it was because we weren't supposed to know. The whole purpose of what happened would have been delineated if people had an advance warning. And I'll just say that my first year of teaching was 1971 out in Racine, Wisconsin in a middle school. I taught 8th grade English those first 2 years. It was 1971, and some of my co-teachers, the other teachers, the older teachers, they had been teaching since the 1940s.
Yeah.
And to say that public schools were different in the 1940s than they were in the 1970s, and that schools are definitely different now than they were in 1971. So this is what happened that day, and so it's called School Lockdown, Classroom Search in my 28th year of teaching. And it starts with a quote by Stephen Sondheim, and the quote is, "I believe teaching is a sacred profession." And here's the poem. After Columbine, before Sandy Hook and Parkland, there was the morning my back door opened and 2 armed police led a German shepherd to the front of my classroom. The dog wore a badge and a warning, "Do not pet." Officers slowly walked him throughout my room so he could sniff purses and backpacks. Ice, silence, suddenly replaced discussion of Macbeth, a play where goodness decays to evil. When the dog reached my desk, he pointed his snout into my open briefcase and froze. The police told me to step away as they searched my folders, my pencil case, my brown bag lunch, and my pack of peppermint lifesavers. The officer then shut my briefcase and said, drugs, weapons, we have to check everyone. You understand that, right, sir? I nodded, but grieved for 1971, my first year teaching. White-haired Mr. Delaney, our principal, his face blazing red at a teacher's meeting after he'd found candy wrappers on the hallway floor and gum stuck into the boys' room faucet. What's this world coming to? He yelled. What's this world coming to? Okay, so I'll end with, this is not a narrative poem, it's today is March 19th, and March 19th is the Feast of St. Joseph in the Catholic Church, and I've always thought it interesting that St. Joseph doesn't say one word in the Bible, not one word. Pontius Pilate says more than Joseph does. And so I wrote this poem. This was actually a poem I wrote for Christmas a number of years ago, but I thought I would end with this today since this is St. Joseph's Day. And I have a copy for each of you that you could follow along. And somebody glue these together. And
So April, we're going to sign one. Hopefully we'll be here next year, so we can use sign both.
you got
Oh, thank you.
I included a painting or a drawing that I like because I've never seen this particular situation portrayed, and it's Joseph caring for the baby Jesus when and Mary is taking a well-deserved nap there.
What is this, the second one? So we come next year, next year when we buy the book, we can sign it.
Oh. All right, so, so this is called St. Joseph Speaks, and I'll just say, before we begin, it's always a pleasure to come here and read. I read in a number of places, and it's always very comfortable coming here, and I really love being with you, and thank you for coming today, and thank you for your good attention. As I said, I was a public high school English teacher for 32 years, so having people pay attention is really nice. It's a shock, you know. So, okay, so this is called St. Joseph Speaks. My hands have touched nothing so soft as his skin drying in the breath of cows. My weary wife feeds him, her eyes, what is it that fills them? I understand none of this. I long for Nazareth, my shop, the solace of wood and nails, far from this strange town and stranger's stable. This is not what I had planned for Mary and me. But how I love this boy who is ours but not mine. I love his cries amidst the rustle of hooves, his hands pink against manger straw, and I love his palms open and reaching, for all this world has waited. So again, thank you very much, everybody.
I'd like to add one thing. You like coming here, we like you coming here.
Oh. Thank you.